in Parliament.
David Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I declare an interest as a trustee of a regimental association? Can I reinforce my congratulations to the Minister at the dispatch box? I too, in my time, have gone from the omerta of the Whip's office to the garrulousness of the dispatch box. It's not an easy transition, and he has carried off with aplomb and class, is what I say, and I look forward to a great future for him. But what he has not been able to do for himself is manufacture time between his appointment and the consideration of these matters. And I am going to speak solely to the First Amendment, to the George Robertson's amendment, Lord Robertson's amendment, I beg his pardon. But, and I will broadly support the government today with some caveats which you'll hear in a minute. But on the other amendments, and indeed on Amendment 1, in fact on all the amendments, I recommend right here and now to the Lords that they, when we send them back, that they send them back again, modified, to take on board some of the intelligent comments we've had from people in the chamber from all sides so far, and that he then looks very hard at accepting them, because next time around I think I'll be inclined to support the Lords' amendments, because they have been very considerate in the way they've presented them. Now, I also know from my experience as a Minister quite how difficult it is to undertake a 180-degree turn on a massively central point in a bill, and so I commend the government for doing almost exactly that on Amendment 1, because it reflects very closely what I and the member for Barnsley East, that's right, yes, put forward in the first committee stage or first report stage for this bill. However, it is an almost 180-degree turn, but it's one which was plainly needed. As the Opposition Shadow Secretary has said, it was supported by the most august panel of people in the Lords one could possibly pick for a subject like this. 6 Chiefs of the Defence Staff, people who don't willingly vote against the government of the day. An ex-Secretary-General of NATO, a former head of MI5, 2 former independent reviewers of terrorism legislation, a former national security advisor, and of course several other senior military commanders. And bishops. Oh, bishops! I thought he said ambitious. And bishops. Well, the bishops often vote against the government. This is something where the military and Securitat, as it were, don't vote against the government, but they are people whose patriotism is unquestionable and whose knowledge is unparalleled in this area. So he ought to pay great attention and take notice. Now, the aim of the bill, as we've heard several times, is to shield our military personnel from being pursued by, vexatious claims. I was going to say something rude about lawyers, but vexatious claims. A proper and worthwhile ambition, one we should fully support. And the government has rightly made clear, and this is the point I support them on, that torture and genocide can never be acceptable, and excluded them from a 5-year presumption against prosecution. However, even with these concessions, there remains a fundamental problem. The government has failed to exclude war crimes from the list of offences, as has been made clear by the opposition spokesman. Now, I asked the Minister whether he would clarify for me how he distinguishes between war crimes and torture and genocide as subjects properly excluded from the bill. And although he did a very skillful response, he couldn't do it, and I don't think anybody could do it. As my honourable and gallant friend made plain, war crimes include willful killing of prisoners in the case that he was related to, willful killing of innocent civilians, willfully putting people through miserable pain or suffering. All these things are quite properly war crimes, and they're quite properly things which we would be held to account by the rest of the world, let alone our soldiers be held to account by our courts and our judicial procedure. So I firmly believe that we cannot protect our own soldiers without correcting this failure to exclude, without correcting this exclusion. And that's not just my opinion, it's the opinion of many of our experienced military leaders. I mean, take, for example, Lord Robertson. I know he was a Labour minister, but he was a Defence Secretary and a NATO Secretary-General who authored that amendment. He argued the bill would create, and I quote, a two-tier justice system in which troops acting for us abroad will be treated differently from other civilians in society. That can't be right, it can't be just. Indeed, it's not what our troops stand up for. It's not what they fight for. When they go abroad to fight, they fight because they stand up for our civilised values, and this is one of them. So there's a certain quirk in that. Now, with this bill, we must give confidence to those military personnel, and confidence to complainants, and confidence to other countries that the United Kingdom remains a stalwart upholder of the rule of law. And there can be no greater test of a national character, no more important measure of our moral fibre, than maintaining the highest of standards in this most difficult of tasks. So we must get this right. If we get it wrong, we will be in a shameful position. It's been made clear several times by the spokesman of the Labour Party. We'll be in a shameful position of putting our troops at risk of being summoned before the International Criminal Court. The Chief Prosecutor of that court wrote to the Secretary of State for Defence. When I saw the account of that, I wrote myself to the prosecutor and got a clarification. And war crimes is plainly in their sights. If somebody is guilty of a war crime, or not guilty, is alleged to be guilty of a war crime, and we exercise the presumption against prosecution, as is stated in this bill, then they will end up in front of the International Criminal Court. It's quite clear to me. This is not a risk. This is a certainty. I give way to the gentleman.
Evidence and spoke a lot about the famous case of Marine A. And if this goes through, if that individual had actually been after 5 years, he would have not been prosecuted for that. But it's quite clear that he would have ended up in the International Criminal Court for what he did. And he would not have been given, I think, the quite right hearing he had in this country, in terms, not just in terms of the fairness of our judicial system, but also on appeal, taking into account the specific natures of reasons why that incident occurred. And that, to me, would be absolutely awful if individuals like that were found before an international court rather than a court in this country.
For people watching who won't remember who Marine A is, he's a Marine who effectively executed a wounded prisoner and went to prison for it.
Murdered.
Yes, murdered is the right word. So, yes, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. And so what would this lead to? This would lead to soldiers of the British Army, or members of the British military, being arraigned before a court which is traditionally used for arraigning tyrants and people who we would view as monsters in every other respect. What would that say about our nation's moral compass? I shudder to think how people would use it. And of course the people who would use that impugning of our position would be our opponents who themselves have no moral compass. They would be the first to use it against us. So it would embolden our adversaries and be a bad day for Britain. So I say to the Minister this: I'm going to support the government today, even though I'm unhappy with that exclusion, because the government's made a major concession in areas which I and Dan Jarvis, I am a member for Barnsley, pressed before. Barnsley Central, I was going to say, I didn't think there was a Barnsley East. and I will support the government today, but I'll say to him this as well, that if the Lord sends it back again and insists on the exclusion of war crimes, I will vote for it next time, and I'll encourage my other colleagues, many colleagues who are concerned about this bill, to also vote for it too. So, as I say, he can't invent time, but it will give him time to look at all of these clauses, all of these amendments, and think through carefully what is really in the interests of our soldiers and what is really in the interests of our country. And on that basis, I support him.
Carol